about something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is connecting youth to science in Grand Canyon. And we have an incredible panel, and so this is really not the Emma show. So this is definitely more about letting the wonderful collaborators that we work with talk about the projects that they have done in the past with Grand Canyon youth, but also how there are these other things besides the hard science and the youth. There's some other cool things that happen when you connect youth with science. This is going to be a funny thing. Raise your hand if you've heard of Grand Canyon Youth. Just want to get an idea. All right, great. So, woohoo! A little bit about us. We are a nonprofit organization based here in Flagstaff. This is our mission, and it's a great organization to be part of. I've been here. This is my 9th year. And who we serve, any youth age 11 to 19, and we have youth that come from all different backgrounds, and there's a lot of alumni in the audience and throughout Flagstaff and other parts of the country. And we have 38 programs scheduled in 2012. That was the really fast GCY part because you guys, a lot of you already know us. So I wanted to start by just talking about our educational philosophy and kind of where this connection between youth and science comes from. And our educational philosophy is to inspire curiosity. And for me personally, I feel like that's something that's very important. And you can learn the name of every flower or every fish or every rock in Grand Canyon, and that's great, but you're going to keep learning, because if you learn that one thing, you're going to want to learn the next flower or the next rock that you find. And so for us, it's a lot about getting youth to be curious about where they're traveling, where they're from, connecting to place. And I loved this quote because I do feel like if you have wonder for the world around you, that's where you really get to connect with life's meaning. And so it sounds very deep and profound, but I think in some ways that's kind of what happens on some of these programs. I like to think that what we are developing is a model. Grand Canyon, the Colorado River through Grand Canyon, is one of the most studied river ecosystems. I would venture to guess the most studied river ecosystem in the entire world. So there's a lot of science that goes on in Grand Canyon, and so there were lots of great opportunities for trying out some cool science partnerships. With that, because there's all those opportunities, we're able to sort of develop this model. And it started with just one and two projects, and two of the folks that helped kind of connect us are here, and we'll speak a little bit more to that. But the idea is that there's a lot of data that you need to collect, and that sometimes that takes a lot of people power. And so we can be more effective if you have a lot of people collecting the data. And the question was, can youth collect data in a quantity and of a quality that is useful? And that's what we keep trying to learn, and hopefully the answer is yes. And so there might be a science project that wouldn't need an entire river trip to go and collect that data, but if they are on one of our trips, then we're doing two things at once. We're doing education and outreach, and we're doing some scientific data collection. But it's also part of the model is by youth doing science, specific project, whether that's fish, and you're going to hear about some of the specific projects, but you're really focused on that specific science project. And then it's, well, what does that project connect to? How does it connect to a larger issue of management in Grand Canyon? Well, that's a pretty, complicated conversation. I am constantly astounded. I have this little informal poll going whenever I work with high schoolers about how many high schoolers have learned about land management agencies as part of their high school curriculum. The answer is not very many. You learn about how government works and that sort of thing, but if you ask youth, what land management agencies are you aware of? What you will hear often is the National Park Service, which is great, but they've never heard of the Bureau of Land Management or the Bureau of Reclamation or Arizona Game and Fish. So there's all these other land management agencies that are involved in Grand Canyon that they've never heard of. And so, by doing this really focused project, then you start learning about, who's managing, and then kind of tying it into the larger context. And so we started in the main stem of Grand Canyon, and now we have projects, and Mariah's going to talk a little bit about stuff we have going on from Diamond Creek to Pierce Ferry. And then we're also trying to use this model in a very understudied river ecosystem on the San Juan River in southeastern Utah. Working together. None of this would happen if we didn't work with fantastic partners. As Helen mentioned, community involvement is something that I'm really passionate about, and I've been really fortunate because I think Flagstaff is an incredible community to work within, and just been fortunate, and there's been a lot of serendipity, I would say, of connections. And as I mentioned, we started with 1 or 2 projects and working with 1 or 2 scientists, and from there, more and more scientists. And now I'll show you a list of some projects, and it's a lot of different projects that we've done over the last 9 years, which is pretty incredible. So this is a few of our partners. Why youth? Why youth in science? Obviously, I'm very passionate about working with youth, and I thought that this quote just summed it up beautifully. We have youth that come from all over the United States and sometimes from different parts of the world. And then we have youth that are from right here in Flagstaff or from Holbrook. And so if a kid from inner city New York comes to Grand Canyon, they may never have seen Grand Canyon or thought that they could see Grand Canyon without an organization like Grand Canyon Youth. But they also then get to come and learn about place and connect with place and get an appreciation for Grand Canyon. For the youth that are from Flagstaff, there's a fabulous story. Keep it short. Fabulous story of a youth from Flagstaff who was on a trip and was hiking out with visually impaired students from the river. And she got to the top and she said, I've taken for granted living by Grand Canyon my whole life. I grew up in Flagstaff. It's Grand Canyon. What's the big deal? Until she was there with youth from outside of Flagstaff, where she really got to have an appreciation for, wow, people do come from all over the place to see this amazing place. And they're the future stewards of national parks. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Richard Lou's book, Last Child in the Woods, but he really speaks eloquently about rising rates of teen obesity and depression and kids not getting outside very much. And so this is a great opportunity for youth to come outside and unplug. But also the science, next slide. Here's a little slide with a quote from a student. Get outside and the science, you don't have to like science to be a part of Grand Canyon Youth. In fact, that's one of my favorite things is when you have students who are not interested in science at all and come and then surprise themselves. Another little story, a student didn't know what they wanted to study in college and came on a trip and had a conversation with a geologist and decided to study geology and called me and said, can you get me that geologist's name so I can send her a little email telling her thank you for steering me in along this path. They're going to be talking about some of the science. I want the picture of the girl with the headphones, we did a lot with natural sound science, and there's no one going to be talking about that. And she's listening to underwater sounds, we did some cool projects with that. Why science? It's hands-on. It's a great way. What I like to say is that the youth are traveling as stewards, not just as tourists. Not that there's anything wrong with being a tourist, but it's a great way for youth to kind of have that sense of ownership and connection to place. And it's really hands-on. You get to do some cool stuff. You're going to get to see some photos and watch a video of kids doing some cool hands-on stuff connecting with science. Also, it's a great opportunity for scientists to connect with youth. A lot of times, scientists stay in this academic realm or, like their own little circles, and so they're kind of speaking to each other. And this is a great opportunity to talk about what they're doing to an audience that they would never have an opportunity to otherwise, which is kind of a cool thing. And it's really fun. And I hope everybody will allude to the fun, but it's really fun to do science. Here's a list of the projects. Probably don't have enough time to go through all of them, even though I really love talking about all of the different projects, but a lot of different varieties of projects. We did a MRSA study once for the health department, which was a really interesting project, looking at snails. So it's a very wide array of projects. But again, the key here is it's not necessarily about training young people to be scientists and be, workhorses and slaves for, the scientists that they're working for. It's really more about the feeling that you're part of something. We've had youth come back and actually approach scientists and say, hey, can you change the protocol? Like, this protocol didn't work. Let's talk about changing the protocol. Or other youth come back and do data entry as a way of kind of perpetuating that process. But it's more important to feel than to have that knowledge, in my opinion. And alumni. We have alumni that have gone on to study geology and education. We had our first teacher come back, and she was an alum. She went to Winslow High School and is bringing a group of her students next year, which is very cool. Environmental policy, also as guides, and whatever they're studying, it seems like they bring a bit of Grand Canyon with them. And so serving kids from all over, that's not a bad thing. How can you help? This is the really quick shameless plug. We have trips open this summer, and they're open to anyone. So we have program catalogs in the back if you would like to take them and spread the word about our program. And I want to say thank you, and I ended with this slide because an alumni who is very dear to my heart, who's an incredible artist, did both of these photos. And if you know anything about some of the issues going on in Grand Canyon, what I love about these two woodcuts is that they speak to a deeper understanding of the issues that are going on in Grand Canyon. It's not just, oh, Grand Canyon is cool and fun. It's, choose or find compromise, energy, or fish, and got sediment with the dam. So I think that kind of sums it up for me. So we have a panel of incredible women this evening, and they're all going to introduce themselves and speak for a couple of minutes about their connection to science in Grand Canyon. Woo-hoo.
Hi, I'm Amy Drout, and I'm a geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey. I've worked there for the past 9 years. Oh my gosh. And I've been involved in Grand Canyon youth trips for the past 8 years, ever since I met Emma in 2004. I love the got side of this slide. Is the person who made that woodcut here? That is fantastic. Anyway, so as a geologist, as an earth scientist, I specialize in sand, and especially in sand transport by wind or by water and on sandy landscapes. And I've been working on sandy problems in Grand Canyon since 2003. So a lot of the science that goes on in Grand Canyon and a lot of the work that GCY has participated in involves how we're trying to understand the influence of Glen Canyon Dam operations on the downstream environment in Grand Canyon. Ever since Glen Canyon Dam was built in the 1960s, we know that the environment has changed a lot, but we're still trying to understand exactly how all that works. And I'll be talking about a project that I work on that GCY has helped out a great deal with. So for people who've done trips or know a lot about Grand Canyon, this is probably information you already know. But for those who don't, when they built Glen Canyon Dam, which was completed in 1963, it changed the Colorado River from a mud and sand-filled stream into what's mostly clear water most of the time now. It also changed the water temperature, and it meant that the way the dam is operated, we no longer have really big floods anymore, or we also no longer have the very low flows that were part of the natural environment before the dam was built. And so people who work for the USGS, National Park Service, and other agencies are trying to understand how those changes affect everything from fish and other aquatic species to plant communities in Grand Canyon to, do we have a pointer? No, no pointer. Sorry. To deposits that used to be left by floods, like the beach in the bottom part of the slide here. You can see a pile of sand with plants growing on it now. That pile of sand was deposited by a flood. So the work that I do actually concentrates more higher up. In a lot of parts of Grand Canyon, there are wind-blown dunes up on that hill slope there, up above the elevations that floods ever got to. And so because the sand in those dunes came from the beaches that were deposited by floods, we're trying to understand how loss of beaches after the dam was built may have changed the environment even up in those much higher elevation areas. one of those wind-blown